Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Teaching at the Right Level Africa's 8th webinar and our second one this year on engaging parents and communities. My name is Samyukta Lakshman, and I am a senior manager at Pratham and part of the TaRL Africa Central team. I will be moderating today's session. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended all our lives, and according to UN sources, this crisis has left about 1.5 billion children across all ages out of school in 190 countries. During these temporary school closures, the responsibility of children's learning falls to their parents, their families, and the larger community. As schools begin to open in some countries across the world now, this webinar seeks to understand the practical and research aspects of parent and community engagement to facilitate children's learning. We have three exciting speakers today who will speak to us about their work across different contexts. Our first speaker is Smithin Brid, who is the Program Director for Early Childhood Programs at Pratham Education Foundation in India. His key roles are to plan strategy for program, develop content and material, train various cadres of people working for Pratham-run preschools known as Balwadis, government-run preschools known as Anganwadis, as well as mentor these teams. His work, in addition, seeks to develop impact measurement and assessment packages and develop partnerships with governments and organizations. Smithin will present on Pratham's work in early childhood development in India before and during the pandemic. Our second speaker is Nobuhiro Kunieda, an independent consultant for International Development Corporation, specializing in community-based education development. Until March 2020, he served as senior advisor for basic education of Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, and as its focal point of a tripartite partnership with Pratham and JPAL. His main responsibility was to provide technical advice on project formulation, management, monitoring, and evaluation of JICA's flagship program of community-based education development entitled School for All. Kunieda-san will share experiences from working with JICA on community engagement programs for primary school children across Africa. Rounding up our panel today is Sam Friedlander, who is the Senior Policy Associate to the Executive Director at JPAL. In this role, she focuses on a variety of strategy and communication projects with the Executive Director. She is also a member of JPAL's Education Policy Team, where she works on policy synthesis projects and communicating lessons about effective education programs to policymakers and stakeholders. Sam will share some of the evidence behind parental engagement. Before we begin, some house rules. Each speaker will get 10 minutes to present, followed by a Q&A for the remaining 30 minutes. We have selected some questions that attendees have sent in while registering for the webinar. You can also write your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we will try to answer them if we have time. Thank you. Over to you, Smithin.
Thank you, Samyukta, and I'm putting my video on because I feel very strange without looking at people. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting us. And I'm going to talk about, since I focus on early childhood education in Pratham, I'm going to talk about only that part. Just to give you a idea that what kind of work that Pratham is doing in India in the early childhood education space. So if you just move to the next slide, I'll be okay. So about Pratham, I think Pratham in India, it started in 1995. I think I'm just giving you the heads up because I thought some people may be requiring this background. So we are working in almost 20 plus states across India. And and you all know that, the methodology of teaching at right level has emerged out of the 25 years of programming across these states. So that's our basic focus. So we have been focusing on building the foundation at one hand, and making sure that the children who are in primary and elementary grades are not lagging behind. So we were trying to help them in building their basic literacy and numeracy skills. So that's it. And then if I have to tell you about the model of early childhood education, next slide, please. Yeah. So I'm going to focus only on one piece of the early childhood education. So broadly, we are active in more than 10 states as far as early childhood education programs are concerned. And there is a center called Anganwadi, which is a program run by Government of India across all the villages across country. So this particular center is run under the scheme called Integrated Child Development Schemes across country. And this center focus on overall development of early years in the village. So, and then major focus is on health, making sure that child mortality rate is being reduced. So this scheme was started long ago, and now it is almost reaching uh, almost each village across country. You can see that there are 1.3 million Anganwadi centers. So their primary focus is on health, nutrition, and immunization of 0 to 6 age group of children. And this is very well known scheme, and it is known as one of the largest schemes for early childhood development across globe. So but their focus is on health, nutrition, and immunization so far. In last couple of years, we have started supporting these centers based on our experience of working with the younger ones for last 25 years. We started supporting these centers to focus on early childhood education part of it. So preschool education, or whatever you may call it. So in that particular piece, our model is that has emerged, based on several years of practices and discussions and brainstorming. Right now, we support inside the center. We go, our Pratham volunteer go and demonstrate certain activities to the instructor officially appointed. Because their focus is on health and nutrition, they're not getting enough handholding on the preschool education part particularly. So our volunteer, our support is on the education part to this particular lady inside the center. So while working with the children inside the class, we realized that there is a need of making sure that families are engaged into the process of development of children. So then we started visiting these mothers, families, hamlets, and slowly it has emerged into a model called mothers groups. So we have hamlet wise, there are small mothers groups, which is a extension of this particular Anganwadi center. And then we visit this center. So we go inside the center, we demonstrate certain activities to the Anganwadi instructor, and we also go to the mothers and help them understand certain activities, give them some material, demonstrate certain videos, and give them some material. So this is how we are trying to build overall development. So we are trying to build an ecosystem around this Anganwadi center to focus on overall development of children, including school readiness and all-round development of the children. Right now, we're reaching up. We are covering almost 3,000 plus Anganwadi centers directly, and then there are, based on our experience, we have started supporting state level and district level authorities by supporting in their training programs and demonstrating models and sharing our experiences, etc. While working with these mothers and the Anganwadi instructor, we have created digital resources which we are now using in the period of pandemic. Can we move to the next slide? Just to clarify, pictures always are helpful. So these are all glimpses from inside the class and while we are working in the community. Next slide, please. Okay. So while working with this, I think we successfully engaged communities, larger communities and families and mothers to understand what is the school readiness means. And you can see with the help of pictures that there are certain skills that we demonstrated in the community fair ideas, and we could successfully deliver and disseminate the concept of school readiness to the wider community. um, Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to come to the point of current situation. Now everybody knows that this prolonged closure of schools and Anganwadi has impacted many children across country. In India itself, it's about 300 million children. So therefore, we started in mid-March. Suddenly, the lockdown was declared. Next slide, please. Suddenly, the lockdown was declared, and then we started thinking of uh, contacting families through telephone calls, and so this contact and connection with the families emerged into a program called Corona Thodi Masti and Thodi Padai. That means have some fun and some learning. The Staying in Touch campaign was started. Next slide, please. So in this particular thing, I think we started sharing our next slide. We started sharing our content, one video per message through WhatsApp platform, and we started receiving huge response from the community. Similarly, we so while working with these children, we realized that there is a less penetration of smartphones. So we started starting using old fashioned technology called SMSs. So in the next slide, you will see that we started sending short messages to the parent, and similar response we started getting. While doing this, we were knowing that there are few children we were not still reaching, because there are certain population that do not have smartphones or even simple phones. So we then developed this radio program. If you go to the next slide, there is 1 minute video that can explain you what is that idea. No, before this, next to this. I'm skipping this because you can take it later. Yeah. So we designed this radio program with the children. This 1 minute clip will give you an idea. No sound. Yeah.
या लॉकडाऊनच्या काळात शाळा अंगणवाडी बंद आहे आणि मुलं पूर्ण वेळ घरी आहे, पण थोडा तरी अभ्यास व्हायलाच हवा ना. म्हणूनच शाळेबाहेरची शाळा या विशेष कार्यक्रमामध्ये मी आरजे रेश्मा आपल्या सगळ्यांचं स्वागत करते.
So as you could see, you can stop the video. As you could see that, initially we started sending the messages through WhatsApp. Then, we started using the old technology called SMS. Now we are even going further behind and started using this loudspeaker based technology, radio technology, and now we are successfully reaching to these people and helping them to understand how they can play a role in a child's education and development. So that's it for now. I can answer more questions if there are any questions about that.
Thanks, Mithun. Thanks for sticking to time. Our next speaker is Nobuhiro Kunieda. So over to you, Kunieda-san.
Okay. Thank you, Samikuta, for the introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Nobuhiro Kunieda. So for the past 20-some years of my work, I have heard many people saying, community engaged may be helpful for improving the access to education, but not its quality. Would you also agree? So today, I am pleased to share with you some of my experience with JICA-supported community-involved education projects called School for All, hoping to provide a counter argument. Next, please. So through School for All projects, JICA has been working with several African countries to ensure quality education for all boys and girls through community-wide collaboration. So to make this happen, the projects have developed a model to ensure the functionality of school management committees, or in short, SMCs, so that the SMCs can facilitate the collaboration process. So some countries have already scaled up a JICA-supported SMC model. And then the projects have been working to refine and scale up a model of SMC, or a SMC facilitated learning improvement model, by integrating the world-famous approach of, as you know, teaching at the right level, or TaRL. Furthermore, projects have been piloting various SMC-based models, such as self-supporting school meal, community kindergarten, etc. Next, please. Yeah, so here are some of the strategic components to make community engagement effective. So first, the project ensures the SMCs to be established through a democratic process to serve as institutional foundation, instead of working on an individual or personal basis. The projects have been also introducing a simple self-supporting planning framework, as opposed to complicated, externally dependent one. The projects also promote participation of the entire community, including teachers, parents, and community members, rather than imposing responsibility on parents or teachers' shoulders only. Next, please. So, with this table shows a comparison between our original learning improvement model, what we call PMAC, and the TaRL integrated model. So please take a look at the table, especially in the red shaded cells on the bottom. So before the integration of TaRL, PMAC solely depended on self-learning workbooks. We thought it to be very effective, but a little costly for its scale up. So we have been integrating TaRL and ASEL, which is a simple assessment approach, as you know, developed by Pratham. So while reducing the workbook-related cost for greater sustainability and scalability. Next, please. So the SMC facilitated TaRL integrated remedial activity has been getting encouraging results so far. This bar chart shows the results of math tests conducted in Madagascar after a 3-month intervention for the year 2019 and 20. I know we can't measure the true impact of the intervention with this type of before-after comparison alone, and we do have to conduct a more rigorous study. But at least you can see the trend of improvement in pass rate for all the 4 math operations, such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Next, please. So how can community-wide collaboration contribute to learning improvement? So this is a PDCA, plan, do, check, and act cycle of TaRL integrated remedial activity. So what I would like to emphasize here is each time assessment is done with the children, the SMC shares the result of the test with teachers, parents, and community members at the Community General Assembly. Then the SMC facilitates discussion on problems, causes, possible solutions, etc. So as you can see in yellow shaded forms, information and decision making always take place at the Community General Assembly. So this is a key to make community engagement effective. Next, please. So how can we transform information into real action? We know that facilitation of community-wide informed decision-making is not simple at all. Even if people recognize the problem of poor learning outcomes, it doesn't automatically lead to an effective action plan. So, School for All projects have introduced simple analysis framework as follows. So, if you can take a look at the chart, on the lower left of the chart, the SMC members guide the participants to discuss problems according to the 3 elements of quality education, namely learning time, shown in red, materials and environment in green, and quality of teaching in blue. As moving on the right, the community discusses the causes and possible solutions for each of the 3 elements. And finally, the assembly comes up with a concrete action plan in the upper side, you can see, including an after-school remedial activity to ensure sufficient learning time for the children. Next slide, please. So a question here is how we can scale up community engagement to a greater coverage. I talked earlier about the result of TaRL integrated remedial activity for the entire region of Analamanga in Madagascar. So for the SMCs to implement the remedial activity, the project first supported the Ministry for organizing a regional education forum to make a commitment for improving learning outcomes in mathematics in April 2019. The education forum was held with the participation of representatives from key stakeholders, as you can see in the red framed area in the chart, such as local education offices, municipal councils, SMC federations, etc. And at the end of the forum, the participants made a commitment to ensure the forum resolution to be shared with the organizations they represented, such as SMC federations, or education offices, or municipality councils, and to implement remedial activity. So the key here is the availability of SMC network enhanced by SMC federations at the municipality level. So with this approach, we think it's possible to provide cost-effective solutions to the learning crisis. Unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss this in detail today, but I just wanted to share with you some ideas for future discussion. Next, please. So before concluding my presentation, I would like to discuss what roles communities can play in coping with COVID-19 shocks to education. Personally, I believe that community engagement will have a greater role to play than before. For example, SMC facilitated discussion at the Community General Assembly or on the radio may be effective and efficient to raise awareness about the COVID-19 among the entire community. SMCs, school management committees, may be able to organize back-to-school campaigns and TaRL integrated catch-up classes, and so on and so forth. So some of these responses have already been or will be taking place in Niger since the school opening on June 1st. Next slide, please. So to conclude, I would like to highlight some of the issues raised in my presentation. So the first, community engagement can enhance the effectiveness of intervention. Sustainability can be improved thanks to well-functioning SMCs as institutional foundation and self-supporting PDCA cycle. A nationwide SMC network can help provide scalable solutions. And finally, community engagement will have a greater role in ensuring quality education for all boys and girls, especially in the COVID-19 context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kuneda-san. Over to our next speaker, Sam.
Great, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, and thanks so much to everyone who's joining. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of the presenters today as well. As Samyukta mentioned, my name is Sam Friedlander. I'm a senior policy associate at JPAL, where I spend my time learning about rigorous evidence on effective programs and education that come out of a type of research called randomized control trials, or you may hear me use the phrase RCTs, and then synthesizing lessons that are coming out of that research. So I'll be talking today about rigorous evidence from the JPAL network on how providing parents with information of some kind can help them be more engaged in their child's education and in turn increase learning outcomes. Next slide, please. So research coming out of RCTs continues to confirm what we've been discussing so far today, that parental engagement can improve student learning. So these programs can do a number of different things. They may provide parents with skills such as literacy training or suggest activity ideas. Other lower touch interventions might send reminders to ask about your child's schoolwork or give updates on grades or behavior in school, so parents know what types of questions to be asking their children. As we all know, while schools are closed due to the pandemic, of course, parental engagement is even more important than ever. Next slide, please. So to explain the angle that I'll be talking about today, JPAL has a policy brief coming out in the next few weeks based on research from 23 randomized control trials in low, middle, and high-income countries that look at information programs or interventions that overcome various kinds of information gaps for parents or students by telling them something relevant about their education that they might not already know. And one of the main takeaways from this body of research is that many of these programs provided information to parents in such a way as to encourage their engagement in their child's education. And then these programs in turn increase learning outcomes as well. So JPAL affiliated researchers have done evaluations of other types of programs as well that increase parental engagement. And I'd be happy to talk about some other avenues as well in the questions. But for the sake of time today, I'll be focusing specifically on information programs. I'll first go over examples of programs that may encourage parental engagement when kids are not in school during the school closures. And the examples I'll share here are from the United States, which may be a bit different from the context in which many of you work. We thought they would still be useful to share, as they're the best examples we have from RCT research of text message programs that are providing activities to parents. And then I'll review examples of information programs that have encouraged parental engagement to complement in-school learning that's already going on while schools are open. A quick note that the examples I'll share today were all evaluated during non-pandemic contexts. So they're meant to be examples of past programs that have encouraged learning, but aren't formal or ready-made recommendations to just sort of put on the ground right now. There would definitely be some contextual differences that a pandemic would introduce. And I'll also note that governments and NGOs worldwide are already implementing many programs to encourage continuous learning during these times, including many types of information campaigns to parents. So it's really great to see that this is already something that people are thinking about. Next slide. So the thinking behind this kind of program is that although we know, and we've talked about already, that parental engagement can be one way to increase students' learning, parents may not know how to do this. So it can be helpful to provide information on ideas for how to get involved. But how can we give parents this type of information? As Sminton mentioned as well, many countries are thinking about text messages or SMS messages as a way to send parents information or ideas. So in contexts where cell phone usage is fairly high, but other types of internet access like smartphones or computers can't necessarily be assumed, and so educational software might not be the most appropriate thing, these types of programs might be particularly well suited for those contexts. And as we'll see in a second, two themes that have emerged from these types of programs are sending actionable ideas that can be easily incorporated into parents' everyday life with their child, Parents often don't have the time to sit down and teach entire lessons to their children. And also that these types of information campaigns are fairly low cost compared to other interventions that have been evaluated. So that's great news. Next slide. So I'll go through two examples of this type of program. And I'll start with a program from the United States that sends texts to parents with ideas for literacy activities. So in this program, parents receive 2 texts per week. And it's important to note that this program did occur during the summer when kids were out of school, just as they are now due to the pandemic. So it's a similar context of this being the only academic content that these children were engaging with at this time. An example of a text you can see here that was sent through this program might be, take turns reading out loud, you read a page, then your child reads a page, great at any age. So this gives parents a concrete idea for an activity that they can do right now to encourage literacy for their child. The program did increase learning outcomes for children in grades 3 and 4 with a medium to large impact compared to other programs in education that have been tested within RCT. So that was great to see. Next slide. And I'll talk now about another example of a similar program that also comes from the United States. So this program sends texts to parents, this time to preschool students, with activities and other types of encouragement to engage in their child's learning. The program sent 3 texts per week, this time during the school year. And you can see here different types of texts that were sent. So some texts were facts about literacy to help parents understand what their children need to learn. Other texts are tips for how to encourage literacy through everyday activities. And then finally, this third category are activities that build on skills that children are hopefully already learning in school. This program increased literacy for preschool students in the program. And then additional research showed that the texts were even more effective at increasing both parental engagement and student learning when they were targeted to the learning level of the child. So sending level appropriate activities and tips, which of course fits in very nicely with our evidence around teaching at the right level. Next slide. So that's sort of one type of program that sends activities to parents and activity ideas. And then another type of program is designed to complement existing in-school learning by providing parents with information on their child's performance in school. So telling parents sort of what's going on in the classroom when they're not there. So this type of program would of course not be relevant during school closures, but could be an idea to increase learning once schools reopen, which I believe is actually already occurring in a few places around the world. So RCTs of programs in Bangladesh, Chile, Mozambique, Pakistan, and the United States have shown that this type of program has increased learning. So what kind of information is being shared with parents? This depends on the intervention, but might include academic progress, such as grades, exam scores, missing assignments, or more behavioral information, such as attendance or classroom behavior. So many programs delivered this information via emails or texts, but others used phone calls or take-home report cards, especially in sort of lower technology settings. So texts, emails, and phone calls were typically weekly or bi-weekly, while the report cards were either weekly or yearly. So the reason why researchers think that learning increased in these programs is that the information enabled parents to change their behavior in some way, and that encouraged students to put in more effort or increase the quality of education at school. And the way that researchers measured this increase in parental engagement was through a variety of activities, such as more parent-teacher meetings scheduled by the parent, parents contacting the school more often, time spent helping children with homework, parents taking away their children's privileges for bad grades, and finally, parents changing the content of their conversations with children in some way to better emphasize what they could be improving at school. Next slide. So although the programs I've mentioned so far all successfully increase learning outcomes, when we generalize evidence from a program in one context to another context, we always have to keep in mind considerations that might affect the implementation of that program. So in this case, one great question is mobile phone access. So do parents have phones that they can receive text messages? Do we have a list of their phone numbers? And of course, children whose parents don't have phones might also be the most vulnerable to falling behind. So this is a really important question to be tracking. One possible idea here is the use of social networks, or people who typically talk to each other and spread information among themselves to spread these messages from parent to parent, even if they don't all have phones or we don't have all of their phone numbers. So there's some exciting research emerging from the health sector on how to spread information from person to person that suggests that these influential people who might be sort of particularly well connected might be able to pretty effectively spread ideas throughout the community. So although this research was done in another sector, it's certainly an idea worth exploring further in this context. Parents' literacy is, of course, another challenge. If parents aren't fully literate, they may not be able to read the text messages being sent to them. And adult literacy rates are likely lower for women and for rural areas. So although this is, of course, a challenge, it's helpful to look at past examples of interventions in low literacy contexts. So I previously mentioned programs in Pakistan and Mozambique. Both sent written report cards, and both were able to effectively increase learning. So although we definitely can't generalize to say this means adult literacy is not a challenge, it's certainly encouraging to see that this has worked in other low literacy contexts. And finally, we can't take for granted that parents will have time or resources to be involved in their child's learning. They may be busy with work, they may have children of very different ages, which would add to the burden, and they may not own books to help their child develop literacy. So sending out activities that are quick or can be added on to everyday activities that parents are already doing with their children throughout the day may help, but this is certainly something to contend with. Next slide. And I'll just quickly wrap up here. So evidence from a variety of randomized control trials suggests that giving parents information is one effective way to increase their engagement in their child's education, and by doing so, increase learning outcomes as well. This is likely an important consideration during school closures, but can also be effective when schools reopen. And some methods for accomplishing this that have been evaluated and found to be effective include, as I mentioned, giving parents activity suggestions and also updating parents on their child's performance at school. These messages have been shown to be effective when they're actionable, fairly frequent, and easy to incorporate into daily activities. But one final reminder that although these evaluations have shown programs to be effective, they weren't conducted during a pandemic. So additional research is definitely needed to better understand the best way to support learning during this time. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion to follow.
Thanks so much, Sam. Kim, can we have the questions? So what we've done today is all the questions that the attendees have sent while registering. We've sort of matched these questions with our speakers, and we'll try and answer some of them and also some of the questions that you post in the Q&A during this time. So the first question is, what can be done right away to strengthen learning for those without access to internet, and how can we scale this? Many families in the most disadvantaged areas are selling phones and radios, and we're not able to reach them with materials due to movement restrictions. So how can we reach them now? Smithin, would you like to answer this first?
Yeah, I think considering the entire discussion and the particular question, I feel that, educating children is not only a responsibility of any one stakeholder, okay, in a community. So, for example, right now, earlier we were talking about it was a responsibility of a school system or a government. Okay, now the entire shift is on parent. I feel that it's a joint responsibility, and in this particular partnership, there are other players also in the community. For example, older siblings, the people around the children. I think considering the social structure, and I'm talking only from the point of view of Indian communities. So where we can see that people helped each other. So in that context, I don't think that only a single parent or only a teacher or is responsible for educating children. We have to create an ecosystem where other stakeholders are also playing important role. Like, for example, while I was explaining the radio program, we have got 10,000 plus volunteers registered with us, young volunteers who want to support. We only announced and appealed from the radio program that it is the responsibility of entire community, not just a parent or a school. So would you like to support? I think this kind of things needs to be considered when we are focusing on engaging wider community, and we need to build some program for it.
Thanks, Smithin. Kunieda-san, Sam, would you like to add?
Okay, well, this is a very relevant but a little bit difficult question to answer. But during my presentation, I briefly mentioned about our community-based education forum approach, where different stakeholders gather to discuss education issues, and then to make a commitment to well, implementing certain activities. So I would say this forum approach could be a possible alternative to reach those without access to the internet, if such a gathering may be allowed. But this can be done after the reopening of schools. So where SMCs are functioning, school management committees are functioning, well, it may only take 1 month or 1.5 months to communicate the forum resolution or decision to all the schools. So within 1.5 months or so. So, and then participants of the forum may think of providing learning materials, or even they can utilize religious channels to pass information to the local levels. So I think it is up to you whether you think it's too slow, the approach is too slow, or better than no solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Kuneda-san. Kim, next question. Okay, so this is for Kuneda-san as well. So how can we support illiterate parents in educating their children?
Okay, thank you for this question. From my point of view, literate parents too, they do want their children to have quality education. That's my assumption. And then, but they may not know what kind of contributions they can make, or each individual parent alone may not be able to do much. I think this was suggested during the SAM's presentation. So as I mentioned in my presentation, maybe we should have a mechanism to enable well-informed decision-making by the community, entire community. So our case is an example of how information, such as a SAIL test result, can spark community engagement through SMC facilitated discussion at the Community General Assembly. So, but for this to happen, SMC members should be trained, well-trained, to play such a facilitating role in transforming information into collective action. Yeah. Thank you.
Samyukta, if I have to answer this.
Go ahead, Smithan.
Right? Okay. See, I think there are, we need to think of two different age groups. As far as, the younger ones are concerned, the children in primary grades are concerned. If we can demonstrate simple activities to the parent, it doesn't really matter whether they are literate or illiterate. They can definitely support. I'm saying this based on our experience at Countrywide. Based on that, I'm saying this, that it's really not a matter where a parent is literate or illiterate. If we can give some simple tips to parents that, you have to make sure that your child studies properly, sits every day, the simple activities are shared with them, so that, basic, before literacy, there are also many skills that children should acquiring. I think in that process, parents can play an important role of encouraging children and even supporting them to become reader, even though they are illiterate. So I think that's very important. And for that, somebody needs to encourage parents that they can do. I think that simplification is required, and we need to create more resources and content and, community around these parents who are supposed to, support these children.
Thanks, Mithun. The next question is for Sam. Kim, can we have the next question? Thanks. So the information on student learning doesn't by itself motivate action. What else must be in place to enable parents to take action? Could you highlight a few key lessons from global research that community and parent engagement programs should focus on?
Yes, thank you, Samyukta. I think this is a great point, and I think it's a very valid point that information doesn't sort of necessarily mean that parents are going to be able to take action. I think one point that I'll highlight is really making this information that you give to parents as actionable as possible. So I mentioned, sending activities or ideas that can be sort of incorporated into everyday activities. And I think, that can really be taken to a pretty far degree. So, activities, suggestions that parents could do with children when they're already at the market picking up food, or when they're walking down the street and maybe they see signs on the side of the road and suggest that they read those with their children. Things like that I think are very, very easy to be incorporating into everyday activities. I think can help sort of motivate parents to see that this doesn't necessarily have to be a huge lift or something that's very overwhelming, but can be, a fairly easy thing to incorporate into their everyday activities. I think other ways to make it easier on parents is timing is one way to do that. So there's actually an interesting new working paper that just came out that showed that sending these encouragement for activity and suggestions is more effective on weekends than during the week, because on the weekends parents had more time. And so during the week, maybe they were a bit overwhelmed. They didn't have a lot of time. They were at work all day. But on the weekend, they were perhaps spending more time with their families and were able to sort of take advantage of this information a bit better. So I think just thinking about the best ways to make the information as easy as possible to use is one way to sort of help parents take this information and make it actionable.
Thanks, Sam. Can we have the next question, Kim? So the next question is directed to Kaneda-san. And I've also combined some of the questions that we've been receiving in the Q&A. How do you monitor engagement, especially parental motivation, reduce attrition, and measure impact in terms of children's progress for interventions targeting parents and communities?
Okay, thank you very much for this relevant question. So, well, in our case of School for All project, all school management committees, SMCs, are supposed to formulate their action plans, and also at the end of the year, they make annual reports in simple formats, just 1 or 2 pages. So these documents describe activity-related information, including financial, material, and labor contributions of all stakeholders, including teachers, parents, community members, and so on. So activity contributions to be made or actually made towards the activities. So, for example, how many facilitators or teachers or community volunteers participated in remedial activities for how many hours, and so on and so forth. So typically, the SMCs, school management committees, hold midterm and annual review meetings to monitor and evaluate the implementation status of and the results of the action plans. So regular monitoring and evaluation takes place. So again, the school management committee's role is very important in facilitating these meetings to keep all stakeholders well informed and thus engaged. So thank you.
Thank you, Kaneda-san. Would the other speakers like to respond to this? Sam, Smithin?
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I feel, this particular period, if you're talking about, the period of pandemic, then there are many things that we need to explore. Okay. But given the experience of working with parents for last couple of years, I can definitely tell you that, the handholding is at one side, but if we have to make sure that parents are doing certain activities, the follow-up, the constant follow-up mechanism is important. I won't call it as a monitoring, but it's a handholding rather than checking that whether they are doing it or not. I think repeated contacts and repeated calls from a known person, especially a teacher, is helpful. And I think from that perspective, we have to build that mechanism to reaching out to the parents on a periodic basis, talking to them again and again, helping them understand things in a better way. And then on the other side, if you have to make sure that if you have to understand whether it is, improving children's outcome, I think we have to create certain mechanism where we can do certain things through telephone calls. If we are willing to do a remotely, if you have to design anything remotely, so telephone calls and reaching out to the communities through some volunteers or students, alumni, will definitely help.
Thanks, Mithun. Can we go to the next question, Kim? If activities are moved to the digital space, how do you find more parents to actually engage with? Smitten?
So I think I skipped my data slide, but I wanted to show that we also conducted a sample level deep dive of this campaign called Staying in Touch campaign, where we are just sending material remotely and asking parents to do certain things on their own, and we are receiving a huge feedback from communities and parents. In that process, we have seen that if you uh, help them understand simple things, they do it, but they need encouragement. So therefore, if we can just if everything is getting changed into a digital space, we need to create a direct contact, because I feel digital tools or a medium is just only a mechanism through which we are reaching to them. But if we don't create any support system for it, if suppose we have no interaction with the parents, and if we imagine that only digital devices or digital content is going to create impact, I don't think that is going to happen. Therefore, in order to make sure that parents are engaged, this human touch is very important, and therefore talking to them, interacting, understanding their challenges, problems, and giving them some solutions is really useful. I think we have to think of that more than because content is huge. We can have multiple video resources and any other sort of form of digital resources. But if it is reaching to the parent and if it is not working, then it is a failure.
Thanks, Mithun. Sam, the final question is directed at you. Kim, can we have the last question, please? So as schools begin to resume, what evidence is there on giving parents information on their children's progress at school?
Thanks very much. I think, as I mentioned, I think there's a variety of programs that have shown to be effective at doing this. And I think something that's interesting to note about these types of programs is their sort of wide diversity in terms of what they're telling parents, and in turn, what kind of impacts we can expect to see. So I think that some programs told parents about their children's sort of academic performance in school. So what are their test scores? What are their grades? Things like that. But other programs really focus more on attendance or on behavior in the classroom. And then in turn, you can see that different types of impacts that we're able to measure as a result of these programs. So some of the programs reported seeing increases in learning, but many also saw increases in attendance or improvement in students' behavior at school. So I think it's interesting to note that these programs can really sort of boost participation in school as well as learning. And I think also the wide variety of types of programs. So as I had mentioned, sending parents texts, sending them emails, phone calls, take-home report cards. So I think there's a really wide variety in terms of what to tell parents, how to tell parents that information, and also what we're measuring to see impacts from these programs. But I think the sort of takeaway lesson is that parents, I think, do want to be engaged in their children's education, and often when we're able to facilitate that, learning does increase. So finding whatever the best way is for that community, if they have high internet usage, or if they don't, if they have if there's like strong mobile phone penetration or not, just finding whatever the best way is to really communicate with parents, and finding the thing that the parents really want to engage with their children with. I think there's a lot of ways to do that, and it does seem like that does tend to be effective. So just making sure to do whatever is sort of easiest and best for the community, I think that has worked very well.
can I add to this, Samyukta?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in last before this is again pre-COVID period. In last 2 years, we generally Indian school begins in June or July months in most of the part. So we conducted school readiness fairs across many villages, where we invited the children and their mothers who were supposed to, join first grade for the first time, and we invited them into a community fair where we conducted few activities, like, puzzle, telling the name, recognizing alphabets, recognizing numbers, counting, stones. So there were many such simple activities being demonstrated in the melas, in the fair, where I think, mothers, especially who were accompanying the children in the fair, could easily understand that their child is not ready for going to school and having a formal education. And then at the end of the fair, we give them some material and, some techniques to help the children in next 1 or 2 months, because we did it in April, and we were forecasting that many children will are unable, are not ready to go to school, because we have seen this in many studies. So when we informed and demonstrated mothers that these are the skills that children are lagging behind before they join the formal schools, which are very simple things that you can do at your home, like classification and sorting of things. If you put potato, onions, and tomato together in a bowl and ask the child to separate it out, your child is unable to do that. If the mother is understanding this particular piece, I think she takes charge. And we have seen in countrywide that when this is informed and demonstrated to a group of mothers, they take charge and help the children to become school ready. So this is how I think, if you demonstrate certain things to a parent, they get encouraged, they understand it, and then they start contributing. If they don't understand, they nobody is going to contribute in a structured way. Thank you.
Thanks, Mithun. I think we're at time. So that's all we have. That's all the time we have today. Thank you to our three speakers for their insightful and interesting presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. A recording of this webinar will be available on the TaRL Africa website later this week. Aside from this webinar today, we have another webinar tentatively scheduled for the second week of July, with government representatives from 3 countries across sub-Saharan Africa who will discuss accelerating learning when schools resume. For those of you who are interested in joining, Kim Tishman will send out an email invite. If you'd like to know more about TaRL Africa, you could log into our website at tarl.info or sign up for the TaRL newsletter at tarl.info /news. Thank you for joining. Take care. Good evening.